And the first part of this is looking at enabling factors, okay, for low carbon transport. So, what are the enabling factors? I could actually put up here, what are the barriers and what are the enabling factors? Okay, it might make it a little bit clearer for you. So I'd like to just spend 5 minutes or so making you do some work while I can finish my coffee. First of all, okay, so if I write up on this screen here, just remind ourselves, what do we mean by low carbon transport? Or maybe Danielle, could you come and help me write up on the screen here? Bicycles, okay.
Walking.
Walking, yes, walking, yes. We all forgot that this morning, yeah? Pedicabs, okay. So we've got walking, bikes. We can put, walking, pedicabs. What else?
E-bikes.
E-bikes, okay. Okay, they have to go under bikes. They're another kind of bike, aren't they? They're not another type. What else?
Public transport. Public transport.
Public transport. What do we mean by public transport?
Bus. Mass transport. Yeah.
Okay, mass transit. Okay, mass transit. So here in the Philippines, what have you got? You've got
LRT.
LRT,
MRT.
MRT. Okay.
Cabeza.
Okay. What else have you got?
Calesa.
Okay.
Horse
Sustainable. Yeah, we have them in French. Calèche. Okay. What else? So what else in public transit have we got? Jeepneys. Okay. Jeepneys. Yes.
O, jeepneys are gas-gas.
That's a separate. Yeah. Separate one.
It depends on the jeep. Depends on the jeep, because we have jeepneys that are run with diesel.
Jeepneys here are
Okay.
So you include e-jeeps?
Okay.
You should include e-jeeps, no?
Yeah.
Trikes?
Right.
Trikes
Are they
and
like
trikes?
pedicabs?
Electric cars.
Yeah, pedicab is different. The tricycle is one.
Fuel-efficient cars will be low in
But they're kind of
carbon.
bike, don't they? The
The trike is one
Three-wheeler.
the three-wheeler, yeah.
Three-wheeler bike.
Motorcycle with a touch cycle.
Oh, okay, so it's a
Depends,
motorized?
It's motorized.
Okay, tricycle is motorized, okay.
Some are four-stroke,
You
some
have
are
to-
two-stroke.
Okay.
Skateboard.
Hybrid.
What else? Hybrid cars.
Hybrid cars, okay.
There's
No,
a hybrid.
hybrid cars, okay.
There's hybrid bus now.
Okay, what about ordinary city buses? Have you got any ordinary city buses?
CNG.
They are,
Buses.
our
CNG buses?
city buses are very bad.
CNG bus.
CNG bus, okay. What else have we got? Anything?
LPG taxis.
LPG taxis? Okay. Anything else? Anything else long
The
list?
ferry.
An example for water transport and air transport.
Do we have?
Most of them are
Yeah.
Basic
that's it.
This is your list, it's
Basic
not
ferry.
mine.
Yeah, this is
not,
our
this
list.
is not my list, this is your list. I
The
asked
list
you
of yours.
what low carbon transport was.
The Pasig ferry.
Basic ferry.
Pasig ferry system.
Ferry boats.
Ferry boat.
Very good. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not existing.
Okay.
No, it's there.
Anything
Yes.
else?
Bangka. The boat. Just the boats, no?
Boats.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Look at it.
Paddle boats.
Paddle boats.
Paddle boats, okay, paddle boats, yeah.
7 pesos.
Mhm.
7 pesos.
Just to cross the Pasig River.
Sa mga
Skateboard. What?
Okay, so you think we've come to the end of your list? Have you got any else?
Yes.
Have you got any?
Solar. Solar.
solar tricycles.
Solar tricycles?
Okay.
Well,
On pilot
solar,
basis.
yeah.
We have it on
Have you got
pilot
some
basis.
here? No. Would you like to have some?
Yes.
Yes?
Ah, we already included the Calesa. Mom, what's the railroad? Trolley.
Yeah,
Trolley.
I don't know trolley.
Okay, where is? I said railroad. Because it's a railroad.
Iyo akin, iyo
So
akin.
that's what I don't know, I've not seen that. No, the trolley is, maybe we have to describe for help.
Like pedal driven.
It's like pedal driven in
Railway.
Railway.
Okay, it's like a bogey.
Yeah.
It's like a bogey on okay.
And when the train comes, you all jump.
I think what we've got here is, an incredibly wide variety, a richness, as Daniel said, an incredibly rich variety of choices, haven't we? Huh? So it's not a lack of choice that is the problem. But what is the problem is that if we think about it, we need to maybe think back this morning, we talked about per capita CO2 emissions. Huh? So let's just have a little look, and we've got another color here. We don't have red, do we? We have black. Okay. So maybe if we could just group together what the individual modes are, okay, and the shared modes. Okay.
Put the star.
We put a star,
Okay.
yes, or a smiley face. How
Or a
about
smiley,
that?
okay,
Whatever
which
you
one?
like. Something. Okay. So, do we consider like pedal bikes individual transport or shared transport? Individual. Okay. That's individual. Walking is individual. Exactly. Huh? Pedicabs. Shared. Okay. E-bikes.
Individual.
Individual. Okay. Kalesha.
Share.
Okay, I can't even pronounce this word. You got it.
Kuliglig.
Kuliglig.
Kuliglig is actually a pedicab with a motorboat engine.
Oh, wow.
It's an innovation.
Philippine innovation.
Philippine innovation.
Okay.
And it's informal. It's informal now because we don't have a policy that actually covers. We don't register. It's not
No
registered.
policy, no registration.
No registration,
Nobody.
but they exist.
Okay, they exist. So let's put a star then, and it's shared, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah? But let's put a little I next to it as well, as it's a special Philippine innovation. Huh? An I, not a I. That's it. Yes. Okay. And then we have habal.
Share.
Share.
Okay.
So do you know what happened?
No, but I'm happy to know it's shared.
It's a motorcycle, actually.
Okay.
But
So is this one with the plank?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we put
Not safe.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's also
Let's-
informal.
well, maybe a little non-smiley face because it's not
Yeah.
it's not
But it's
particularly
shared,
safe,
it's
huh?
shared,
Low carbon, but not safe.
Well, I don't know. Is this safe or not safe? Do you consider that a safe form of transport or not very safe?
No, not safe.
Not
Not
safe.
safe. That's why I put the
Right.
sad
So we've
face.
got grumpy faces on those two. Skateboards, okay.
Skateboard?
Individual. You don't usually carry somebody. Certainly not your grandmother anyway. That's for sure. Okay. Public transit, mass transit, MRT. It's definitely shared, isn't it? Huh? Huh? The trolley. Is that shared?
Share.
Yeah.
It has two passengers.
Okay. Trolley, jeepneys, any jeeps, they're shared, aren't they?
Share.
And tricycles, shared?
Yes.
Yeah. E-trikes, yeah. Solar trikes, all the trikies, they're all shared. Huh? Okay. Carpooling, shared, definitely. Yeah.
So FX GT Express is like your taxi, except
Yeah.
that
Big taxi.
it's
Carpooling.
shared, but it's shared.
Okay.
It's carpooling.
Combi
Like a
taxi.
combi taxi.
Combi taxi, okay, so that's shared. Okay. Hybrid cars, individual.
Sometimes individual.
Yeah. Huh? Hybrid buses, they're shared. Huh?
Can be shared.
Yeah. CNG buses, taxis are shared. Yeah. Okay. Ferry boats, unless you have your private, is shared, I presume. Yeah.
Can share.
Paddle boats as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, do you have any auto rickshaws here, or are they more?
The auto rickshaw is like our
Oh, your
tricycles.
tricycles. Okay,
And
that's
our
your tricycle.
Kuliglig.
Okay, okay, that's good. Okay, fine. So what have we got here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are only individual, okay? Huh? Out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So actually, we have a very good balance between shared transport and individual transport. So why is it our transport systems are all built for private individual transport? Huh? Can you tell me? When the majority of the modes are shared transport. Doesn't seem right, does it, somehow?
Because our legislators are all riding in cars.
So it's
Our
the-
policymakers ride in cars.
It's because of historical, traditional approaches to transport planning, isn't it? Huh? It's because the perception of a transport system is a car-based transport system. Huh? These are the kinds of things when we know, thank you Danielle, thank you. We know that if we're going to go for low carbon transport, we have a wide variety. It's not like we're going to make one particular technology or one particular kind of transport the only choice in the world. Whereas at the moment we have a lot of forced car choice, don't we? You are almost forced to take your car because there isn't the proper system in place for all these other choices. And all these other choices are already proven technology. We're not talking about some incredibly expensive technology in the future. We're talking about things that are very local, provide very local employment for the people that live in your cities in that area. So it's not like that we're talking about anything in the future. We're talking about today. And this is what you have today. So it's not like we don't know what we should be doing. Now, what needs maybe to be put in place for these other modes to become more dominant? Come up with some few ideas.
We need bike lanes.
Bike lanes, right, okay, bike lanes.
Dedicated roads.
Dedicated roads
We need
for
good
these
walking.
modes. Okay,
We
so,
need good walking sidewalks with trees so
Okay.
that people will be encouraged to walk.
okay, so safe, secure environments.
Yes.
Okay. So really what you're saying is that we need to shift our investment in infrastructure away from what we've got to shared space, to shared modes, to a more inclusive approach to transport. Because if I understand it, pretty much everybody can afford most of these shared modes. These are pretty affordable to everybody. Whereas at the moment, the infrastructure is all built for maybe, I don't know, 20, maybe a little more percent of the population. Roughly how many people afford to have their own car in the Philippines? You have that in your figure? Anyone have that figure?
I cannot memorize it.
Roughly how many people? I mean, in places like Delhi or India, about 11% of the population can afford to have a car. But the congestion is caused in the cities because the higher percentage of people who can afford to have a car live in cities. And I would suspect it's pretty much the same here. So you have actually, across your whole national, let's say your national population, probably 10 to 15% of the population who can actually afford a car. And yet almost all your infrastructure investment goes towards cars. So that is really the first thing, that if we're going to really break down the barriers and create an enabling environment for low carbon transport, you have to look at the local context. You know, I couldn't come up with that list. You came up with that list. It's your list, it's not my list. and really how to get the message across that there is a tremendous rich variety of options, and it doesn't have to be just based around really the developed world car option, but it can be made into a very appropriate local context. So I think that would be a really nice kind of takeaway for you to think about. So let's look at the kind of the higher picture again a little bit. So, whoa, my virus license is going to expire. Sorry about that. So we've had a reflection on the different types of transport. What really needs to be put into place is, in order for low carbon transport to become the mainstream transport, we need to have an approach to connect all these different types of transport. And that is where it becomes so important that regulation and government intervention creates an enabling framework rather than a disabling framework. And when I mean that, in the last 10 years there has been a tremendous increase in trying to get the private sector involved in things like transport, because public transport in particular is seen as being a very expensive thing for the public purse to have. And yet what I'm hearing certainly around me, and is very much the case in many, many cities, is that if you do not have a professional approach to mass transit, then it does become unaffordable if you leave it to market forces. And comparing shared transport with individual transport in the present framework as we have it at the moment is not fair. And I mean it's not fair because I don't know, how much is the price of fuel in the Philippines?
Almost 60 now.
Okay.
About $1
About $1 a litre, something like that. Yeah. Okay. So, and I presume that it might have gone up quite a bit in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Yeah.
The past
Yeah.
weeks.
Even in the past weeks. Okay.
So now there is a lot of restlessness.
Yes.
Activists are in the streets.
Yes.
Our
Of
jeepney
course.
drivers are like protest, asking for higher fare.
Yes. Of course. Yes. And this would be perfectly normal. If prices of fuel go up, then prices supposedly of public transport also would go up. If it's in the informal sector, if it's the market allowed in the private sector to be involved. So there needs to be some sort of framework that creates an enabling environment that you might have, and it's already the case in places like the Netherlands. You have one smart card, so when you go in the morning and you go on your normal commute trip, you just pass your smart card in front of a reader and the amount is deducted from your, let's say, electronic purse that's in your smart card. And if you go on the bus in the next time, it's the same ticket. So you have like your car keys as one ticket. And this is a national-wide ticket, it's not just a city-wide ticket. We have to really try and get partnerships that can pull together the stakeholders and get some real change, because that has to come from both national level, local level, and really the private sector and the different involvements. And civil society and NGOs play a big role in that. So what I was saying in that is that we have to try and change the words that we use to enabling frameworks instead of barriers. So that would be a step really in the right direction. And I'll share with you a little later some examples of how other cities in the world have actually tried to create some of these partnerships. Okay, so what are enabled factors, or barriers if you prefer that way? And one of the big ones is this fragmented decision maker. Large number of stakeholders. You look at this list, my goodness, how many people would you have to talk to if you wanted to introduce an integrated ticketing service? You know, that would just be in one city, yeah? We'd all be dead before it would be there. I mean, imagine, yeah, how many jeepney owners might you have in somewhere like Metro Manila? 10,000, I don't know, maybe more. Yeah, yeah. So you're not going to be able to get 10,000 people to come up with a consensus in the like in the UN process. They can't even do it with 194. So, you know, let's be realistic about this, but let's also make sure that we recognize what the problem is and what needs to be put in place to make it an enabling framework and not just a barrier. Then there is the role, obviously, international, national, regional and local governments. They play a really huge role on this. How taxes are dispersed, of course, is a very important aspect. These can provide the incentives for change. If a property developer is actually given tax relief for having taken part in a cycle lane, might be slightly lower property taxes or commercial taxes for a period of time, this would be an incentive for them to do it, wouldn't it? Huh? But there's nothing like that yet in place. So these are the kinds of things that you need to think about. We certainly need to get the public and the private sector to work together towards a common goal. In general, the private sector is actually pretty open to any idea that it feels that it will either get fiscal benefits from or be able to make extra profits. So if you talk in those kind of terms to them, there's usually a way around in it. And the public sector usually needs the private sector to help them pay for things. An interesting example just on that would be the renovation of the Emirates Stadium. I don't know if any of you are football fans out there. Yes, some men out there might support one or two, possibly some football teams. Basketball, okay, fine. Well, in England, there's a lot of support for football, of course. Okay, with David Beckham and goodness knows who else. But they have a very big stadium which was falling into disrepair, and it's been completely refurbished in the east of London. And part of the deal of getting the property permits for the refurbishment meant the developers had to also refurbish 2 metro stations, 2 underground stations in that whole deal, which for them was a very small part of this huge investment. But they knew that unless they could get people to and from that stadium by public transport, they were not actually going to be able to fill the stadium because they did not have enough parking facilities to furnish the numbers of people that would have to come to that stadium by car. So public transport was a key component in that. Okay, so political will and support, get the voice of the different interested parties, data, statistics and information, and a knowledge about low carbon technologies. And then in that whole framework there are key clusters which really need to be looked at, and the institutional and financial and political are really absolutely key in there, and we'll spend a little bit of time looking at them, and I'll share with you some technical and technological aspects, but you can pick up those really in the slides afterwards. So let's have a look at some of the institutional characteristics that can create this enabling framework. We're looking at the complete institutional framework, the decision-making processes, the regulations and the legislation in place, and the number of stakeholders, which of course is a key component if you look at this list that we created ourselves. Good practice principles, if you like, is of course strong leadership, and this can be part of an institutional change or it can be also part of political change, but strong leadership and champions are really important. That is something that maybe some education of some key people might be worthwhile, and their NGOs and civil society, of course, and the academic constituency really do play a big role in that. You need to have identified champions that don't politicize the project, but that support it and that understand that if they want to have a sustainable city in the future, if you want Metro Manila to actually be able to deliver the economic development that you anticipate, you're going to have to find a couple of champions that are going to move on that. Coordination and integration, both vertical and horizontal, again, absolutely key. And inclusive operations, again, it was really interesting to hear how in the Philippines you're beginning to take those steps to get participation in government legislation development. And once you've got that in other sectors, then getting it into transport is not so difficult. Obviously, evidence-based practices, and there is a huge number of good examples all over the world. One question I've still not found the answer to, although I suspect I know it. Curitiba BRT was put in place like in the mid-80s. It took 25 years before the next BRT was really put in place in Bogota. And since Bogota, in the past 15 years or so, there has been probably 55 new BRT systems. Why did it take 25 years to go from 1 to 2? And then people got the message. What would have happened, I mean, if we had got 55 in the first 25 years from that it took us to go from 1 to 2, we would maybe have BRTs all over the world today. Huh? And we haven't got the time any longer to have that 25-year gap between one good idea and the next good idea. It's got to have to move much, much more quickly. So the exchange of good practices is really key, and with our communication channels today, that shouldn't be so much of a problem. But we need to maybe make some real efforts to make sure that formal and informal communication channels, these social networks, are a great way to get some information out in the public. Or was it Dr. Doi this morning was talking about the, what is it, the Waze app or whatever, is that right? You know, these are the sorts of things that are coming up, and the young people are not going to hang around too long. They don't want to wait 25 years before the next one of those comes up. So we're going to have to move very much with the times on that. And we need to obviously put principles into practice, and this can mean some reform or restructuring of government bodies. Of course, if you don't have champions in there, it can't be done. You need to sometimes create new institutions that have multi-dimensions to them, that would get the health ministry around the same table as the environment ministry, around the same table as the economic development ministry, and around the same table as the Ministry of Transport. And the focus of their discussions would be low carbon mobility. It would not be one particular aspect of it, it would be the whole realm that they could possibly come up with. So it's not just putting a few e-jeepneys on the street, it's really creating a new transport system that each one of those ministries has some ownership of and some buy-in for. Because as we mentioned, a lot of the co-benefits from transport go to different sectors of society, so that has to be paid for. Build strong policy networks, obviously establish new processes, make strategic partnerships across disciplines. Mentioned very quickly this morning how important it would be to communicate better and more clearly to the general public, because the general public gets a lot of information from the media just about how wonderful and environmentally friendly cars are. So, you know, that's the information that they have in their heads. What else would they know if we don't tell them, actually, that if you take 2 walking trips a week, you'll lose 500 grams? Huh? It's a good health option, it makes you lose weight, and everybody wants to be looking healthy and fit. Oh, and by the way, it's actually really low carbon, and it'll be cheaper as well. So you've got a lot of nice messages, but you have to actually package them in the words that people want to hear. Okay, and the role of key institutions and legal processes, and we often forget this. We look at it more as a regulation, a kind of top-down, stick-throwing action. But it is really to facilitate. It's to facilitate the choices, and it's to help identify problems. It's to give a holistic and integrated formulation for strategies. It's to look and provide and enable, in fact, evidence-based policy development. which is based on empirical and up-to-date research, not on the kinds of information that was available in 1995 or 1997, but is at least 2002, 2005, something recent. Look at the cost effectiveness of the approaches, and here, when we think of that sky bridge, how many kilometers of BRT could be built for the same price as the sky bridge? How many kilometers of pedestrian areas or cycle lanes or something like that could be built for the same price? So where are you going to spend your money? The synergies in delivery, of course, and supporting regulations. So that means transport demand management aspects built into some of the, let's say, more push kind of regulations. This is a typical example of a government structure. I'm sure that you're fully aware of this kind of thing, where you have several different top-level officers that might connect directly with the national parliament, but actually getting a message from this person or somebody down here in local government all the way up through this to the national parliament, or understanding the message from the national parliament that has to be filtered down through all these different bodies and getting some coordination. Not easy, I'm sure that you would admit. I don't know what it looks like in the Philippines. But this is just one particular example where there have been tremendous changes in China, which was well known for having a very strong bureaucratic, heavy top-down approach. And here in Shanghai, they have really tried to reorganize and realign all the decision-making and planning offices that deliver transport across the city. And one of the most important parts of this is that they have combined not only the planning and infrastructure, so the civil engineering kind of approaches, but they have got that in line with the policing and the enforcement of it. And this is a key area that you really need to think about, how policies are going to be properly and effectively enforced, because you can have a very limited amount of policies that are well enforced, much better than a large number of poorly enforced bad policies. So if you just think about parking, if you know that you can park pretty much anywhere on any pavement, oh, I'll just leave my car there for 10 minutes, it'll be all right. You'll do it, won't you? Everybody will. I'm just going to pop into that shop. Oh, I just left it running while I go in to get that something or other. I pick my kids up. I just left the car in the middle of the road running on fuel. I mean, if you know that you are going to be fined a lot of money for doing that, you won't do it. If you think you can get away with it, you'll do it. It's very, very simple. We're all human beings on this. In London, when they introduced the bus lanes down some key thoroughfares in London, such as Oxford Street, and in conjunction also with the congestion charge, people would nip into the bus lane really quick. Oh, I just nip into this bit and go down there and I'll be able to turn left before the bus comes. First of all, they started putting buses going in the opposite direction to the regular traffic, which is pretty frightening if you see a bus coming towards you and you're going in the other direction, I can tell you. And the second thing is that with the congestion charging, they had a whole lot of cameras put in place, because that's how they monitor whether you've actually paid your fee to go into the center of town. Works very well. But it also allows them to check who's going through the bus lanes. So if a car was found in the bus lane, or parked in such a way that it stopped a bus from actually going past, they were fined £80. Well, that's a lot of money. I don't know, that's about $120 US, something like that. You do that once, okay, bit of a mistake. You do it twice, it's beginning to get a little bit expensive. You just don't do it 3 times. It's very, very simple. So they have nobody in their bus lanes. It's not a problem, but they made it a choice. You want to go in there? Fine, but you just have to pay a very heavy fine. Okay, these are the kind of stakeholders that are kind of regular stakeholders. obviously, there are local contexts and local changes in this, but it's really important to think as wide as possible to get as many stakeholders on board to understand what low carbon transport really means. I would suggest that maybe at the beginning of today, you wouldn't have been able to pull together that list quite as easily as you were able to do just after coffee. It didn't take you very long, 5-10 minutes, nothing more. But this morning you would not have been thinking in that kind of perspective. So it's really important to get as many people on board as possible. And one area that is really important to get on board, and that's the business associations, because they understand that they need people to get to work in order for them to make a profit. And if you're spending 2.5 hours sitting in traffic to get to work, you're going to arrive at work in a pretty poor state, and you're not going to be very productive. You're going to be mainly worried about how you're going to get home in the evening. And whether you're going to be able to pick up your kids from school in time. And whether you've got any time to go out and do some shopping in the middle of the day, which means you can feed your family. So your mind is not on your work, so you're not actually being productive. So having effective transport systems that allow people a reasonable commuting time is a really important business proposition, and we kind of forget that. The other area, the other group of stakeholders that I think are really important are on that list. Now, who else would like to come up with an idea of really a very important group on that list? Thinking in mind what I had in mind this morning, what I was talking about a little bit this morning.
Well, at least for the Philippine setting, we will also include academia, like universities or research groups.
Okay, academic, yes, academics, yep, absolutely, you're right, it's not really on there. Research institutions and scientific institutions, yep. Who is on there that's a really important one that's often forgotten? This one or this one? The media and the general public, very often forgotten. We usually remember, the passenger user groups and the planners and maybe even the business the business associations, but we often forget to actually get the media and the general public informed, because they are really the ambassadors of what low carbon transport could deliver. So this was an example of how it was approached really in Brussels, that did a lot of consultations with stakeholders. You think that maybe public transport might be quite simple in places like Europe or UK, but I can tell you Brussels is organized in such a way that you have the central Brussels area, which is a very small inner city area. You have 19 communes, which are districts around the Brussels central area. Each one of those districts is usually run by a different political party, and there is a language difference. So in Belgium you have two languages, French and Flemish, and you have within those 19 communes, 19 districts, a certain amount that are Flemish speaking and a certain amount that are French speaking. And of course, surprisingly enough, or not surprising, the Flemish don't like the French, otherwise they'd all be speaking one or the other language. So there's a lot of squabbling that goes on. And if you're trying to build a new tram line or a new bus line, you'll find that it will need to go through at least 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or more of the districts, of the different districts. So you have to get every time agreement from every single one of those districts. So there is a huge need for a professional approach to stakeholder consultation, not just deciding on a plan and then presenting it to different stakeholders and asking them if they agree with it or not. There are two completely different things. If you can get stakeholder engagement early on in a project to understand what the different stakeholders need and require and expect to see in this kind of plan, and then get them to work with you to try and develop something which is built on the consensus from these different stakeholders, it takes longer. It does take longer. But at the end of the day, you have something which people have ownership over. They don't feel that it has been imposed by somebody else. And this is a key area in low carbon transport, that you have to have ownership You have to get some sort of arrangement to get these different actors involved and interested in a common purpose, in a common good. It's not easy, but it can be done. So even within Brussels, they had all these different stakeholders, which they needed to, first of all, individually find out what they needed, and then as a consensus, come up with different things that they would suggest of how low carbon transport could be implemented in their city. This is another example in Mexico, which has a very nice aspect to it. That they actually, obviously, they did it, and they called it a green plan consultation for Mexico City. And they had over 1 million participants, which is not, I mean, that's a significant number of participation. So it must have cost quite a reasonable amount of money. And what I find is really, really interesting is the response of the adults to certain proposals and the response of children to certain proposals. Children are not stupid. Look at this. I mean, safe use of bikes, skates and skateboards in the city. Yeah, approval 93%. Well, that's an obvious, isn't it? But most of the time, we don't think of it in those terms. So if we are looking to build infrastructure that these kids are going to want to use all up to their lifetime, this is the kind of infrastructure that they'll be using, not the adults. They want to have walking environments. They want to have decent collective transport, and they want to have green spaces in their cities. It's a relatively simple framework, but we don't actually think about those. If we said, okay, you want to have 60% of your population in Manila should be within a 10-minute walk of a green space, and a green space, you decide how big a green space is. That would give you a real framework for protecting certain cool spots in Manila. It would have climate change advantages. It would have social advantages. It would have quality of life advantages. It would have all sorts of things that would be not directly linked to that green park, but it would actually deliver what the wider community would want. So, financial factors, you have a whole module on finance tomorrow. One of the things that you need to just remember is that obviously climate finance can provide a certain amount of finance for low carbon transport, but this is going to have to be in the main produced from domestic budgets. And there are different ways of doing this, and there's lots of examples all over the world. I'm not, as I say, going to really go into this in any detail, but it's in your notes. Public-private partnerships are examples. There's stuff in Asia, such as the Bangkok SkyTrain and Metro. The Copenhagen Metro is a very clear example of building out into a brownfield site that is paid for, so the metro was paid for by future development bonds of that site. So it was really instead of the regular approach to transit, which is have a look at the quantity of people that are going to use your transit system and then build it once that density of population has been achieved. Well, that's too late. Copenhagen did it the other way around. They said, okay, we're going to direct the way that Copenhagen is going to be enlarged, and we're going to take it along this metro line. So we build the metro line first, basically into fields, and then the development is brought on afterwards. And the property that is developed around the metro line and metro stations pay for that metro line through government funding. So it's a little bit complicated, but it's actually a much more sustainable way of doing it. Okay? Congestion charging scheme, I think we've talked a little bit about that. It's been very successful and is now introduced in Stockholm. Unfortunately, Manchester and Edinburgh in England, they decided to put it to a public vote. and it was refused. Well, it's hardly surprising, because if you ask the question, do you want to pay to go into your city, what would you say? No, exactly. So it just shows how important asking the right questions and preparing the voting public for these kinds of slightly changed lifestyle, difficult questions. It says here, I don't know if you can read it there, council tax, road tax, fuel tax, up to 1,200 a year. One cost you have to say no to, vote no, is to stop the congestion charge. So it's it's really clear that they were saying, well, we don't really understand why we're being charged to go into the centre of town. There was no communication about how important it was for the city and the quality of life of cities. Okay, the political factors. Again, political will and support. I mentioned earlier in this module how important it was to have a champion, and this really is incredibly important. Not sure if you can see this properly, it's very blurry and fuzzy, but it is actually the centre of Seoul about 15 years ago, and if you count along here, this is a huge urban freeway of about 13 lanes of traffic. I think there was something like 660,000 cars going in using this road per hour, which is a relatively large number of vehicles. Which would you prefer? A city that looked like that, or a city that looked like that? Yeah, pretty much all of you would prefer to have a city that looked like that. So this was the stream that was pretty well covered up by that urban freeway. And the mayor of Seoul, I would have really liked to sit in on that meeting when it was presented to him. Well, sir, how would you feel about us ripping up this urban freeway and renovating the stream that's underneath it? And, well, we're not actually going to build any more roads to compensate anyone. I mean, you know, how did you deliver that kind of message? Well, the way that they presented it was that they would invest in public transport. They invested in BRTs, new MRT, new metros, and the development along this area suddenly became very high potential development as well. So the numbers of people that come and use this area is enormous, and of course they all spend money. Whereas none of the people that went on that freeway, none of the people on that freeway ever stopped to spend any money, did they? So there was a very strong business case as well, which is often forgotten. Okay, it doesn't look like exactly the same place, but it's just taken from a different angle, but it is a little bit further along the same area. Leadership at national level is really important. There are some very interesting new incentive programs. Places like India, which has a huge incentive program for improving the quality of public infrastructure, which is called the JNERM. I'm just going to give you the acronym there. It covers all sectors, of which transport is one of them. So they have allocated a large, significant sum of money to the different sectors, and the transport area is destined for cities over 100,000 population. They have to make some institutional reform in order to have access to the money. It has to go to mass transit, not to private transit, and it has to be obviously approved by the federal government. But it is a grant and not a loan, which makes it a big difference for cities. And they have extended this to also include some of the operational side, the vehicles that would be running on BRTs, and it has allowed at least, I think, 60 cities to plan now to have either mass metropolitan underground lines or BRTs. So it has really stimulated a huge growth and interest in mass transit, and that's great, because India needs it. And ProTram in Mexico is a similar national federal led program that again stimulates investment into mass transit. So I'm sure that if places like India and Mexico can do it, then the Philippines probably can also do it. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Transjakarta in Indonesia. Yeah? No? Yes? A little bit. A few. But not many, obviously. Well, Indonesia is just around the corner from you. So, you know, it's really something that should, if you're thinking of having a BRT, then there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Transjakarta. I mean, it's not an easy process to get it right the first time around, and I won't say that necessarily it was from day one the best BRT in the world, but it was affordable. It was supported very strongly by the governor, which was really important because it would otherwise never have been built. And part of that was because the governor himself would actually sit in on some of the stakeholder discussions and consultations. And he heard from the people really on the street what it was like to live in Jakarta with only informal public transport, how much it was costing them, what their aspirations were for a mass transit system. So this is one way of really trying to get a champion involved and interested, because it's by talking to people on the street, if there's one thing they have an opinion about, it's transport. If you ask somebody how they are, you know, how did they get to their work in the morning, they will tell you very, very clearly, and they will tell you about the traffic, and they will tell you about how much it cost, and how awful it was, and how this, and how that. So they always have an opinion about it. And this is a very good way of getting political support. Okay, right, we're going over time, so technical factors. I'm also going to move very quickly because you're really going to have this in more depth tomorrow morning. But the main message that is important to take home is, of course, you need robust data collection. You need frequent collection of information and statistics. And it is better to have a very strong, detailed collect of data and statistics on a frequent basis for a small area of your city than to have a wide, rather insignificant program on collection of data which is very difficult to use in any way. It's only worthwhile collecting data if you can use it. So it has to be comparable, it has to also be of use in order to gain an understanding of the impact of current policies and practices, and it needs to be able to be used for developing future policies and practices. So that's a really important part of this whole puzzle or plan to get towards a low carbon future. There's a lot of partnerships out there. I don't know enough about the Philippines to be able to put up here some examples, but I've heard today really a lot of the different partnerships that you have. And it's really important that you use them to a maximum. And I'm delighted to see that there's so many different representatives in the audience today. But by using partnerships and platforms for spreading the knowledge and understanding about low carbon transport and the importance of it within climate change is, I think, a key aspect that we need to take on. So, just a quick summary then. I think that there are a lot of good practices. I gave you a quick introduction to some examples of good practices. We identified some of the challenges, but also some of the enabling factors that can be put into place for achieving low carbon transport. We highlighted these factors within the institutional, legal, political, and financial arenas and these themes. There is a lot of technical, social, and technological factors that need to be followed up to support the realization of low carbon transport. And one of those aspects is really the collection of data, which we'll focus on tomorrow. and financing, of course, which is here, which we'll have the module on tomorrow. So, do we have any questions from the floor, or even points of clarification, or other points of discussion?
Good afternoon. I'm from Taguig City, and we have two ends in city. We have the high end at yung hindi naman low, but the other side, because we regarded there is this global city, and there is one place there, the district that is considered a province. So we are regarded as provincia that. So before we regard narrow streets and roads as a barrier to carbon emissions, but after the modules, maybe it's more an opportunity. So maybe we should think na yung narrow road should be designed for more mobility, yung walking ano na lang, pedestrian na lang ang mag-mobilize instead of a street full of jeepneys. So maybe we should, together with my pal there, Mr. Alyap, our boss in transport, think of something na prioritize walking instead of using jeepneys or tricycles.
That sounds absolutely great, yes.
We're actually planning a mass transport system for Taguig, and it's not just based in global city, because we're planning a mass rail transit, intercity mass rail transit that will also serve the populous side of Taguig, not only the modern side of Taguig. Because they were expecting that, of course, we're going to put a mass rail transit and e-shuttles in global city is the most modern part of Metro Manila. But we also will plan to adapt to adapt or to place to improve our transportation infrastructure in the other side of Taguig, where there's very narrow streets and most of the population of Taguig are there. So I think that's where we should also focus on instead of just the modern side of the city.
That's the gig.
The MRT is actually the most efficient form of transportation we have today in Metro Manila, carrying something like 600,000 riders in one day at certain times. And I said, if you had to carry that much in terms of cars, can you imagine how many cars do you need when most of our cars have only one or two people?
Ridership of cars 1.2.
Okay, so we really need more of the MRT, but many people don't realize that I think the operator of the MRT can field more cars, except that under their terms, if they field only a certain number of cars, and which is below a certain level, they only have to pay a small fine. So they'd rather field less cars than what they are actually supposed to field. Why? Because it's more profitable that way. And we riders, well, we're always saying we don't want to pay more, so you get what you pay for in a way. And if you're not willing to pay for an improved MRT service, we're not going to get it. The other thing is that there are things we can do. For instance, if you say, okay, if you want to pay less, then ride early. Don't ride during the rush hours. In other words, there's going to be a congestion pricing as well in transport. Then I think that will work. But I think what is really important is that we need now to organize the transit riders so that they can demand more comfort rooms, right? Greater amenities, even better security. Now you have a lot of security problems in MRTs. You get pickpockets and so on. And normally we thought that would not happen inside a closed system, but that is now happening. So I think we need to organize. Now, the problem is, do you want to do this at the larger integrated metro level, or are there things you can do at the local government level? And I think that's the debate. Do you have to wait for somebody to think of this grand scheme and integrate everything, or can you start doing these things at the local government level? I transferred from Quezon City to Marikina at the time of Bayani Fernando, and I improved my quality of life. And I think many of the things that they did in Marikina, the retrofitted sidewalks, for instance, the lighting, and then the sewerage facilities were extended by cities like Pasig, because the good thing ended at the boundary of Marikina, so it embarrassed them, so they had to put these lights and so on. So I think there is a lot of things that can be done at the local government level, which is what our project in New Mobility is saying. We try to instigate people to think of what they can do by showing them a map of the situation, and when they realize things that are there or not there, they suddenly start thinking, why? And since they are in a group, they start talking, bakit hindi ganito, bakit hindi ganyan? And then suddenly you realize it's something that your barangay captain can do for you. You don't have to bring it all the way to the mayor. For instance, many potholes, many broken streets, many broken sidewalks can be done at the barangay level. So I think the message is we can learn about our traffic at the local level first, and then we get mature and we are able, our minds become ready for the bigger things at the regional level.
Maybe it's asking for too much, but since we discussed over the juice, CO2 is a resource, and it has a value. What I didn't find is the fare. Any data on the fare in relation to per capita income. How much is fare vis-a-vis the CO2 emitted? I say that for a reason that I would say here in the Philippines, it's probably unique in our economy that a regular worker would spend nearly almost 40 up to 50% of his daily wage for fare. How is that related to other economies, which have higher carbon emission? And owing to the fact that we have listed so many options and they are labeled as low carbon transport, why are we spending more in terms of value or worth for every carbon that we emit if we are able to use a lot of options which are low carbon? So it seems that even if we are provided with public transport and they are supposedly low carbon, it seems inefficiency is still the name of the game. Meaning this public transport run around empty and we are subsidizing the inefficiency because they require regulated fare that includes vacant seats. So in effect, that is inefficiency and that is emitting more carbon with less people. So that would have been helpful if we were somehow able to see comparative data on how other nations, how other economies fare as far as spending for carbon emitted and how much. That's asking too much, I know. But it would help policymakers to really get near to the fact and realize it's foolish to be spending money, good money, for a resource that only goes up into the atmosphere. So it's good management if we can sequester this and make good money for a resource that has to be saved. No? So I say that because in the Philippines, like what Dr. Loy has said, there's only a few hours in the day that rush hour happens and everything is jam-packed. But downtime, everything is empty.
And they're running about almost empty the whole time, so especially the buses. And that's why buses, most of the time, they are labeled, they are pests because they are just running around empty most of the time. So I always keep on stressing efficiency, 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 efficiency. So where is that going to be lodged on? Who has to say this has got to be efficient? I see the Shanghai model for governance, and that's centralized government. How is it going to work in Curitiba, for example? It took 25 years for the step 2 to happen. So it would have been also nice to see what centralized governance mean to low carbon and democratized governance to low carbon. Thank you.
That's probably a whole new training on.
It's too much.
Certainly on the fares, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and it's a very interesting point. It is really, there is a whole module and an extremely good source book, in fact, done by GIZ on the financial aspects, and you can certainly refer to that. Just in general terms, in UITP's experience, which is my most experience, in fact, in public transport, is that there is a kind of, apart from some very few exceptions, that in general public transport covers up to 75 to 80% of its operations from fare recovery, from fare box recovery. So that would be that's a kind of reasonable benchmark of a good, efficient, quality transport service. And part of that is done by gaining efficiencies through encouraging people to use transit during off-peak times, which is exactly what you're talking about. If you make a differentiated fare so that it is cheaper for people to use it when there is capacity but lower demand, and more expensive for people to use it when there is less capacity but high demand. It's the same whether it's mass transit or whether it's parking. In your notes, you'll see that there's a very interesting example in San Francisco where they are managing parking demand using exactly that demand management technique, where they have sensors in the road in a certain district, and people can look on the internet the availability of parking in that area. They can decide whether they're going to go or not, depending on the availability, and if they find a parking space, they will maybe pay for the first 2 hours at a lower rate, and when they need to top up, they'll get a message on their phone saying, do you want to top up or not? But sorry, demand is high now, so we're going to have to charge you $4 an hour instead of $2 an hour. This is all kind of demand management stuff which IT technologies are making possible. So this is all becoming quite possible, and according, the operators better efficiency options that they can put in place. So this is part of having an efficient transport system, certainly. And in terms of the fares, there has been in the last 10 or 15 years really a general interest from both the international agencies and national governments to privatize mass transit, not to invest in it, or to expect that they cover all operations through fare box capacity. So if you try and cover operations entirely from fare box, you can do it. There are clear examples of that, somewhere like the Heathrow Express, which is a privately operated, very short airport link between Heathrow and London. It costs you £12.50 for a single fare and £25 for a return fare. It's full, it's used all the time, but it's hugely expensive. But they make a profit. So people can choose if they're going to take the Heathrow Express, if they're going to take a taxi, which is even more expensive, if they're going to take a coach, or if they're going to take the underground. And each one of them has a different price tag and a different time ticket, if you like. So it's really about us thinking about how to develop menus of choice for people within the transport system, whereas at the moment we tend not to think in those kind of terms. So I think it's about provision of choice, and it's also about professionalizing the sector, and without professionalizing the sector, then we're not going to be able to get the efficiencies that we need in order to deliver the kind of transport system that will be a low carbon transport and reward people also for, let's say, good behavior. If you go in a car, you think you're being, there's no stigma in going in a car, and if you get pushed onto the MRT and you are actually taking a low carbon option, there's no reward for the suffering that you have encountered. So, it's really to change our perspectives a little bit on that.
Just to ask you, Heather, about your experience about culture and choice. Because in the Philippines, culture plays a lot. For instance, people can buy what do you call this ticket, 100 pesos on the MRT? Stored value ticket. And they will need that more than that for the whole week, but they will not buy a stored value ticket. They will pay for every fare, right? And we sometimes ask, why don't they just get a stored value ticket? It's going to be more efficient. They don't have to fall in line, and they are going to get a bonus. But they would not do that because they want to have the freedom of choice of how to spend that money in micro instances. Do I get a merienda later on, or things like that? You would have been able to buy more if you got the bigger box, but people will buy 1 peso pack in poor communities, and if you make it 2 pesos, they will not buy it at all. So I think that's something we need to understand, and maybe our friends can help us understand this, because if we don't understand why, then we cannot change their behavior. We cannot change the behavior of our people, and we need them. They need us to understand them, so that we can change their behavior. And I don't know how you deal with that in other situations.
But I think it's the same the world over. I know that, shampoo is sold in large bottles all over the world, but in places which have very poor communities, it's sold in tiny little sachets, because that's what they will buy. They could probably afford to buy a bottle, but they're used to buying it just in that little sachet, and they don't like to take the risk of buying a bottle. They just need to buy the little things. They don't know if tomorrow they'll have enough money to pay for their food, so they don't want to buy a bottle and then not be able to pay for their food tomorrow. So we do need, as you say, to understand how that mentality works, and how to change that kind of habit, because there may be different ways of doing it, and part of it can be possibly some microfinancing, that would actually help people to understand how to manage their finances in such a way that actually it can benefit them to buy in slightly larger quantities without going over the top. But this is really an important stakeholder understanding, and it's a very local context as well. But I think the underlying message is, first of all, that transit has to be affordable. And if you total up all these different tickets, if a regular worker is spending 40% of his income on transport, then there is something dramatically wrong with the system. Because, you do not, how much, if he spends 40% on his transport, he must spend maybe 15-20% on his lodging, on his housing. He doesn't have much left for his food, and he certainly has nothing left for leisure. So, and education, forget it, So there needs to be a shift in that, and educating people to understand that paying 40% is too much, and that they need to actually demand a system that would allow them affordability at a lower level. and how that could be put in place, and what words to use in order to get that message to them is a really important part of the puzzle. As we said earlier, if you don't ask the right questions to the right people in the right way, you won't get the right answer. You'll get the wrong answer. So it's really important to spend a bit of time, and it's not natural in transport planning to ask those questions and to try and think in different ways. We've been taught very much to think MRT, a rail-based system, this is what you need. The fact that people come out of that rail-based system in huge quantities and need to go on somewhere else, not my problem. They don't care about the walkability around the rail stations, they don't care about the integration with bus systems or jeepneys or auto rickshaws or anything else, not my problem. So, this is a real change that has to go on from both sides. So there's no magic solution.
How they solve the problem. And many of our people, our friends here are from local government. The way the poor will solve that problem is that they will put their residents close to work. That's the only way they can work. And that means they will have to be informal settlers. And so, which is why we have so many squatter colonies, because what they try to do is to live near where they work. That's the only way that they can afford it. And here we are, we try to move them away from the city all the way to Antipolo and San Mateo and San Juan del Monte, San Jose del Monte. And they will go back to those communities and rent in those very places where they used to be squatters, even if they already have homes. And so I think, again, we need to understand that from their point of view, it's logical. I don't care whether I stay in a barong-barong and with my kids, for so long as I can walk or bike to work, then I can do my work. But if I stay in a very far place, and then I would have to pay 40% for transport, then that's not going to be workable for my family. So I don't know whether is that your experience? Is that what you see?
As things get bigger, you forget that governments then need to spend more on infrastructure. They need more sewage pipes, they need more roads, they need more hospitals, they need more schools, they need more policing. They need more of everything that actually, if you keep a certain reasonable density and a certain mixed use approach to land use, then you make efficiencies in your public services. So you don't need to spend all that money in going further and further out. And of course, the further and further out, if you remember that Toronto piece of research, means more and more transport, doesn't it? So, it's a vicious circle that we need to somehow stop and create the efficiencies. So I think on that, I'm going to thank everybody very much for your attention.